Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Harder, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Contown and Matt. Contown, how are you today?
Doing good, Ronnie. We're recording this on Wednesday before fall camp starts, so you can feel
Yes,
it now.
sir.
It's getting here. It's right around the corner. Feels good.
It's exciting, man. What, four weeks until the season starts? 30 days till the first game against Western Michigan. I'm excited.
Yeah, we get a little appetizer the weekend before for Nebraska, Illinois, a little Big Ten play early on. So
Absolutely.
it's gonna
Week
be here
zero,
before we
that's
know
going to
it.
be a lot of fun. Yep.
Yeah.
Matt, how are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, the Hall of Fame games tomorrow. Saw coaches tweeting about camp, pre-camp activities. It's football's in the air. It's time.
Absolutely, man. It's the best time of the year. Weather starts getting a little cooler. Football season starting up. Just every Saturday and Sunday, sometimes every Thursday. You can't ask for anything more. So
Right.
it's exciting. But on this episode, we kind of wanted to go over our schedule and season predictions. The first thing that we'll do is go over the games that we feel like are guaranteed wins. Then after that, we'll go over guaranteed losses quickly. And then the three of us have picked one game each that we feel are the most important games or just the biggest games of note during the season. We'll go in depth into those games. So leading off here, we'll go over the games that we feel like are guaranteed wins. Obviously, we just talked about the game against Western Michigan to start out the year. You guys agree that's a guaranteed win?
I do. Yeah, I think Western's a solid MAC program, and I'm sure there's gonna be some first game jitters, but
Yeah.
should be a comfortable one.
Yep, I do too. They bring back a lot, but
Mhm.
it's still a MAC program at home, so should have a easy victory there.
Next game on our list is the game versus Northern Illinois. Not much explaining needed there. The next game after that is the homecoming game against Rutgers. Do you guys agree that's a guaranteed win?
Yeah, I mean, last year's results notwithstanding, that Rutgers has still got a ways to go to catch up in talent. I think Shiano's making them better, but I think that's still kind of classic Rutgers category of surefire win.
Yeah, agreed. I think Rutgers is maybe a little potential for a look ahead game there for Michigan, but Rutgers should be better, but they're still a ways off talent wise.
Then on October 23rd, they've got a game against Northwestern. It's at home. Northwestern had a really good season last year, but it seems like, or Contown alluded to earlier in the day in our little group message, Northwestern seems to be the type of team where they're good one year and then they struggle the next. So I think this is going to be a year where they struggle, and Michigan picks up the win there on October 23rd. You guys agree?
I definitely agree. Like you said, it seems to be a every other year type of thing, and I know we'll probably get some disagreement here because Fitzgerald has really done a great job there. But you lose Peyton Ramsey, you lose 2 first-round draft picks. I think that's a game Michigan should handle easily.
Yeah, I agree. And I know it's probably Fitzgerald's defense, but they are losing long-time defensive coordinator. Michigan guy, I'm blanking on his name, but he was pretty well respected throughout the league, I think, for putting together quality defense every year.
Yeah, he was older, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Much older. I can't remember his name either. It's like on the tip of my tongue. I just can't think of it. I keep wanting to say the Iowa State coordinator, Jim Heacock, for some reason, but it's definitely not him. He's at Iowa
Hankwitz.
State.
Hankwitz.
Mike
Mike
Hankwitz.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, he was in his 70s,
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
still coaching. So,
Yeah, and he'd always get someone in the year, whether it was Ohio State or Penn State, someone that Northwestern wasn't supposed to hang with. Hankwitz would dial something up and look in the corner. Your ticker score scrolling on the bottom of the Michigan game, and you see a Northwestern game is closer than it should be. So it'll be tough to replace.
Yeah, I do think they are recruiting a little bit better. I think they're going in the right direction. I've really loved their offensive line classes the last few years. I'm not sure.
Didn't they get the top center in the nation a couple years back?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's playing left tackle, and he was been dominant.
Well, that
Interesting.
helps when you have Kurt Anderson, an offensive line coach. He's an excellent coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
They came into Michigan, stole a couple O-linemen.
Yeah. Caleb
Tiernan,
Tiernan.
right? Yep. Tiernan and the kid from Edwardsburg, who I'm blanking on his name, but he's a road
Josh
grader too.
Bereavy.
Yeah. Yep.
He played in a funky offense, but God, I wanted Michigan to push there. He was a
Yeah.
player.
He's a mauler. He's good.
So the next game on our list would be the game that is the week before against Ohio State, and that's at Maryland on November 20th. I just don't see it with Maryland. I don't see it with how Loxley is having that program trending right now. I just don't think that they have enough talent. I don't think he's the best coach in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think Maryland always seems to have like one or two skill guys that's kind of lightning in a bottle. And, outside of that, it's like if you can stop that guy, there the game's pretty handily won by Michigan. So, and I don't know. I know they've got a couple big receivers coming up, big recruits. So,
Yeah, I like Raheem Jarrett, that one receiver that they've got.
yeah.
Yeah, they seem to. I mean, every new Maryland coach we hear, this is the guy that's finally gonna keep the DMV talent home and make Maryland
That hasn't
constant.
happened.
No, it just doesn't happen, and I think it's getting them late in the year is a benefit to teams like that. And I'd almost put Indiana in the same category, although we've seen that they can be very good. But you get a team with less talent later in the year, I think it's less likely that you're going to fall into a trap game. Because the last couple of years, we've seen Maryland beat Texas early and then do nothing. So I think Maryland will fade, and that should be a game that Michigan, it goes like a typical Maryland-Michigan game.
So that's our list of guaranteed wins. A couple of games I feel like are gonna be wins, but they'll be a little bit tougher. At Nebraska on October 9th, October 30th at Michigan State, November 6th against Indiana. Would you agree those three are probably going to be wins? They'll just be a little bit tougher than the others. Oh, and Washington, excuse me.
Yeah, so Washington is the game that I would like to highlight a little bit. So I'll jump right into the Nebraska game. I do think that could be tricky. It worries me personally. Michigan's more talented. Frost has had a ton of struggles, but their schedule is pretty easy before the Michigan game, outside of the Oklahoma game, which they're going to take it on the chin there. But they could be 5-1. That could be a night game. That could be kind of Scott Frost's Super Bowl, if you will. Michigan could be coming off a loss to Wisconsin. Like, there could be some kind of a perfect storm that makes that game tricky. Neutral field, noon kick, all that. Michigan wins that game, but I do think it's an interesting game. More interesting than kind of what we've seen on the field from Nebraska the last 2-3 years would suggest.
Yeah, I agree on Nebraska. I keep expecting them to get better, and they just seem to kind of end. Each season seems to be kind of the same result for them. I mean, they didn't, obviously nobody played a full season last year, but they're right in the same range that they've been all 3 years under Frost.
Mm-hmm.
I keep expecting them to get better, but I think you covered it. Their Michigan will be more talented, but there's a lot of trap factors there.
It'll be interesting to see because they lost some talented players. They lost Wandell Robinson to transfer. They lost Fedone, Thomas Fedone, the freshman tight end that Michigan wanted really bad, to an injury in the spring. So, yeah,
is he out for the year?
I believe so, or a good chunk of the year. I think it was Achilles. I think it was an Achilles. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's for the year.
Yeah.
If it was an Achilles, he's definitely out for the year. I mean, that's the worst injury you can have in sports.
Yeah, and he was a skinnier freshman trying to put on weight, so he's probably done for the year.
That is tough.
So, but it's like you said, Matt, you keep waiting for them to get better. Frost can coach at some level, but I don't know where the production's going to come from without a couple of big scale guys gone. I just don't know the path to getting better, I guess.
So our next game on the list at Michigan State on October 30th. If we lose to Michigan State for a second year in a row, I'm going to lose my mind because that game last year they shouldn't have lost that. Everything went so right for Michigan State, and everything went so wrong for Michigan, and they still only lost by 3 and had a chance to win it at the end of the game. It was probably the most maddening game I've seen since 2016 Ohio State. It's definitely up there. I mean, 2017 Michigan State in the rain, pretty maddening too.
I was gonna say that one.
The
I mean, go ahead, man.
The fumble against Michigan State in 2015. Every time Michigan plays Michigan State at home, it's just complete madness.
Yeah.
Under Harbaugh, it's like
Aside from that one game in 2018, yeah, I agree.
2018 was on.
Was it 2018 or 2019? 2019 where they blew them out like 42-7. It was 2019.
That's right. Yep. So 15, 17, and last year, all at home. You've got the fumbled punt. You've got the monsoon. You got whatever you want to call last year, and just. But it seems like for that game specifically, Michigan has come more prepared on the road under Harbaugh than typical. Typically had road struggles, especially against equal or greater talent teams. And I think for whatever reason, for that Michigan State game, maybe it's just a rivalry, but they seem to be more prepared on the road. I expect them to win that, but as a Michigan fan, you kind of expect them to win the Michigan State game every year, and it doesn't go that way.
It's always a tough game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it helps that game is I think it's our 7th game, so I think it's on the back half of the season. Michigan State's got a tough schedule. They could be in pretty bad shape by the time that game comes around. So, Michigan should win that game if it was the first game of the year, but Michigan State could also be a little bit beat up. They're already at a talent disadvantage. Like we said, Michigan tends to go into East Lansing pretty focused under Harbaugh. He hasn't lost in East Lansing yet, knock on wood. But yeah, I think that's and you're going to have the whole revenge tour factor. Michigan's going to get up for that game, I think. So
yeah,
I think it'll go well.
Just for reference, you were talking about Michigan State's schedule. They open up against Northwestern on the road, 9 p.m. on a Friday night. I just said 9 p.m. on a Friday night. 9 p.m. on a Friday. Excuse me. Then they go to Miami a couple weeks later. Then they play at Rutgers and then at Indiana before Michigan. Not easy, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, that's a legit 4 games they might not be favored in. Yeah.
And then the next game I had on our list was Indiana, but that's the game that I'm going to highlight later on. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Guaranteed losses. I think we can all agree November 27th against Ohio State. You could chalk that one up as a loss. Unfortunately, once again. Do we agree that Penn State at Penn State on November 13th is a loss?
I actually don't. It certainly could be. I'm not saying that
a guaranteed loss. I should say.
I definitely don't put it in the category of guarantee. My preseason outlook, I'm gonna go ahead and say that Michigan wins that game. It's gonna be a day game because since it's in November, Michigan would have to agree to a night kick. And we play pretty well at Penn State for day games. It's later in the season. Again, I'm just kind of projecting. I think the defense will gradually get better. Penn State's got a very tough schedule. They open at Wisconsin, they have Auburn, they go to Iowa, they've got Ohio State, all before Michigan. So you could have a 3 or 4 loss Penn State team by the time Michigan has to go there. I think that's probably going to be the most winnable Penn State game in Happy Valley Harbaugh gets, other than the first time he went in 2015. So I wouldn't put it in the guaranteed loss. Definitely could be a loss for sure. But I think Michigan's got a good chance.
Yeah, I think, as much as we go back and forth about Penn State and Michigan, that they are the one team that, for the most part, recruits, right about the same level in the conference. Ohio State is above everyone else recruiting wise, and Penn State and Michigan are pretty comparable. It seems like every other year, maybe Michigan gets them for 2 years, and then Penn State's a little bit better. So they have a lot of talent. And new offensive coordinator, they should be set in there a little bit, with it being later in the season. And, defensively, Michigan should be set in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that'll be an interesting matchup. I'd probably give Penn State's offense the edge there just with some of their returning players. But I'd also give Michigan's offense a little bit of the edge against Penn State's defense. I have it as a loss, but I agree with Connor. I don't think it's a guarantee. Yeah, I don't think it's a guaranteed loss.
Yeah, it could end up being like the game from 2 years ago when Ronnie Bell dropped that pass in the end zone.
Yeah,
it could just end up being so close.
And this is such a Michigan fan, like a Michigan fan would say this, but if that 2019 game at Penn State where Ronnie dropped the pass, if that was played at noon, I have no doubt that Michigan wins that game. Yeah. And I know I sound like such a Michigan fan saying that, we just ran out of time. It was
people
crowd,
underestimate how crazy it gets at night at Penn State.
And
Ohio State's gone in there and absolutely shit their pants.
Yeah. Michigan dominated 3 quarters of that game. And like you said, we were playing to the crowd for the first quarter, playing horribly. And then we kind of won the back half of the game. So I think Penn State, especially the time of the kickoff, makes a big difference. So if that was a night game, I'd say for sure lean loss, but I have hope.
I agree. Next game that I had on the list was at Wisconsin. We know the struggles that we've had against Wisconsin. Last time we played at Wisconsin was that the game where Dylan almost died?
Yeah,
Dylan McCaffrey. Yeah, yes. That was a horrendous game.
Yeah, I have that one as a guaranteed loss.
Guaranteed loss.
I have it highlighted. I'll get into it a little bit later, but I have that one marked as a guaranteed loss as well.
So
yeah, I agree. I think that's I would rank that as Michigan's second toughest game, right behind Ohio State. I mean, we haven't won in Madison, I think, since 2004, 2001. That's gonna be a tough one.
I will say, if they had a competent quarterback in 2017 at Wisconsin, they would have won that game.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that game, but there was some really bad penalties called, or non-penalties called, and then penalties not called. I'll never forget when Wisconsin tied it up at 7 on the punt return. They completely missed like 3 blocking the backs, holding on that entire run back. Yeah, just
the horrible.
Think about that.
Horrible call on the DPJ touchdown.
Yep.
In that game.
I was at that game.
Were you really?
Yeah. Yep. I was at that game. The Brandon Peters hit happened. Seems like our quarterbacks always get hurt against Wisconsin. But yeah, I was at that game. That Peters hit was, I mean, we were in the end zone and it was right in front of us. It was ugly.
So speaking of Wisconsin, Matt, this was a game that you wanted to highlight today on this episode. So why don't you dive into this game and kind of give us a brief analysis on what you think will happen in this game, and just give us a little preview.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I have Wisconsin as a guaranteed loss. I have a lot of respect for the Wisconsin program, and I, for as much talk as it's gotten of, Ohio State dominating Michigan, the last 2 years, the Wisconsin games have been just as ugly. 2 years ago in Madison, they beat Michigan 35-14, and if you remember, Michigan scored all of their points in the second half. It was 28-0 at halftime. And then last year, it was also 28-0 at halftime, and it was ended up being 49-11. I think Wisconsin, more than anyone in the country, knows their identity, recruits their identity, and I think overall, the offensive line and the run game gets the most national pub as being their identity. But I think since Jim Leonard's been there, it's been their defense. In 2019, they were 14th S&P plus, and in 2020 they were 4th. Just dominant defensive units the last 2 years. And against Michigan specifically, they've held them under 300 yards in both games, under two touchdowns or less in both games, and 6 total turnovers for the Michigan offense. They have absolutely stifled Michigan's offensive attack. They're big and they're physical and they're well coached on defense, and they bring back 7 starters, and that does not include Fabian Hicks, who has been a rotational corner for at least the last year, if not the last 2 years, and Scotty Nelson, who started 2 years ago but missed most of last season with an injury. So their defense has been dominant, especially against Michigan, and they bring back either 7 or 9 of the 11 starters, depending on how you classify Hicks and Nelson. And offensively, the offensive line, they bring back 3 out of 5. They've reload the rest. It seems like every year that's always a strength. They've actually recruited better on the offensive line recently. I don't know if more highly rated kids are interested in them, or if the services have just gotten better at scouting Wisconsin high school offensive linemen and rated them higher. Graham Mertz seems to be the lightning rod that everybody wants to talk about. I think he's okay. I don't think he's
Perfect
anywhere.
game manager.
Yeah, I don't think he's anywhere near as good as what the first game showed last year against Illinois. But I think he's better than a few of the guys they've had recently. I think similar to Michigan State, their quarterbacks have gotten a little underrated. And this was before Paul Chryst was there. But, like Scott Tolzien was in the NFL for quite a few years.
Yeah.
It's like the Michigan State guys, even in college, they were considered game managers, but they send 3 guys in a row to the NFL. Connor Cook, Kirk Cousins, so I think Mertz is fine. I think he's better than what they've had recently, but, I don't think he's this 5-star hot shot that for some reason their fans continue to refer to him as a 5-star. From what I've heard, at least. Maybe that's just Big Cat over at Barstool, but
he was highly ranked in a class that was full of weak quarterback prospects. And I think that Jay Kalinsky was ranked higher than he was, and he just ended up being not that great at South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think their receiver group is fine. They bring back most of it. They're deep.
I like Danny Davis.
Yeah, I think this group actually. Danny Davis, I like. I like
Kendrick
both
Pryor.
The two. Yeah, Kendrick Pryor's the other starter, but I was going to say I like the 2 Michigan kids actually, AJ Abbott and I think it's Taj Mustafa is his full name.
Yeah.
I just think they're a little bit better at wide receiver. Tight end, I think that if not the best, one of the best tight ends in the country, in Jake Ferguson.
One of the best, yeah.
Yeah, and they played Hayden Rucci a little bit more last year. That's kind of an H-back. They didn't play a fullback as much, but they bring back Rucci and the fullback that played as well. So, the only guy they don't bring back of the skill positions is the running back. And he was kind of that third down back for most of the time. Then his 5th year, he became the starter. But I think the younger guys were more talented, and they've got a Clemson transfer that'll be in the mix. I just think they're good. I think they're a good program. I mean, they've recruited better. They're well coached, and they're really good on defense, and they're tough to beat in Madison. I think Michigan is going to have a tough day, but I think Michigan's making the right steps with a bigger defense to get to be able to be more competitive with Wisconsin, get back to being competitive with Wisconsin. But I don't know that will happen this year.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Matt. It seems to me that Wisconsin's ceiling is just very good. I don't think they're ever going to be great along the lines of an Ohio State or Alabama, Georgia, in that classification year in and year out. But they are specifically built, their identity, as you mentioned, is specifically built to stomp teams that aren't good at the things that Michigan is not good at right now. And we've seen that the last 2 years. So it's, the best possible outcome for Michigan this year, if you hit that early on the season, in the season on defense, maybe that game's competitive. But Wisconsin is that offensive line. They're not going to make Mertz do too much. Great tight end. They're really built to go up against and exploit what Michigan is weak at right now. I absolutely agree. It's going to be a typical Wisconsin team. They return everyone, and they're going to try to shove it down Michigan's throat for 4 quarters.
Yeah, the more I listen to you guys talk about Wisconsin's roster and their depth chart, the more I think that this is going to end up being like one of the games against Michigan, like it has been in the past couple years. I really didn't realize how much depth that they've had and how much returning players that they have on their roster. It's insane. I mean, like you said, 9 of 11 starters on defense, and most of the guys on offense are either returning starters or they have plenty of game experience. So I think we could chalk that one up as a loss at Wisconsin.
Yeah, it winds up being 8 on offense as well. So it's either 7 or 9, depending on how you look at it on defense, and 5 of the 6 skill guys and 3 of the 5 offensive linemen. And offensive line, the spot where you really wouldn't worry about them losing. Even if they lost 4 starters, they're going to reload there. So they bring back a ton, and it's on the road, and it's bad matchup. I don't see it going very well unless Michigan is a whole lot better than most people are expecting.
I will say I agree that Mertz I don't think is special. I think he's fine. If I were playing this game in NCAA 14, I'd be loading the box and making Mertz
absolutely
beat you over the top. And that could go really poorly. That could be also a loss. But I would certainly try to make Mertz beat you with his arm, and with their skill guys who you think your skill guys on defense can match up with athletically. So put 7 and 8 in the box and dare them to go over the top, because they'd rather not. But yeah, I don't think it'll go. I don't think it'll go that way.
Well, let's hope that 2016 Michigan shows up and that it's Alex Hornibrook level of quarterback play for Wisconsin rather than what's been given to Michigan the past couple of years. Contown, let's go over the second game of the year. Michigan just announced today that it's going to be a night game, a maze out against Washington. Just kind of go over and preview what that game you think will be like.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Washington because for a few reasons, but number one, I think I would describe them as kind of beatable Wisconsin. I think the similarities from what I've done in my research and looking into that game to what Matt just talked about with Wisconsin, the similarities are pretty striking. You've got a long-time defensive coordinator who's a DB guru who, you're going to run out of 3-4 with some big bodies up front, some good edge backers, and really solid DB play. And up front on offense, you've got a ton of returning guys on the offensive line and in the running back room. Probably okay at best receivers, and a great tight end and a quarterback who's going to manage the game. So on paper, they are very similar to Wisconsin. But I think there's some aspects of this game that are maybe a little more intriguing just because we haven't seen Washington in a few years. And the main reason I wanted to talk about this game is because I think we would probably all agree on this. This game is going to really set the tone for this season. Michigan comes out and wins this game. We'd have to falter pretty poorly down the stretch, I think, to not look at this
100%.
as a successful year. It's going to be a night game, like you said, Ronnie. It's going to be a maze out. My gut says they're going to wear a special uniform, probably the all blues. The crowd's going to be great. Washington will be a ranked team. It would do so much. It'll be a big recruiting weekend, I'm sure. It would do so much for the program and for recruiting and for the general vibe about the direction of the retool to come out and win this game.
Could be game day too.
It could be game day. It's the ABC broadcast, but that Ohio State Oregon game is going to be huge. But I know game day they'd rather not go to Fox's broadcast, but we'll see what they do there. But on the field, Washington returns a good amount on both sides. It's 7 or 8 depending on how you frame it on the offense, and 8 or 9. Same thing on the defense. So they return most of their starters on offense. They return their entire starting offensive line, and I think they return their entire second string offensive line too. Depending on who you talk to, you get different or what publication you look at, you get different reviews of the offensive line. The left tackle, Kirkland, is very good. He was first team all Pac-12 last year in the short season they had. He's more of a run blocker. It'll be a very interesting matchup if Michigan can get them into like 3rd and long passing downs, to see Aiden Hutchinson go up against him in pass rush or whoever Michigan is throwing at him. I think the interior of the line, despite being very experienced, is kind of the weak spot of the line, which is, if you're Michigan, is exactly what you want to hear. They've got a really strong stable of running backs. They go 4 deep there, and they kind of like it's similar to Michigan's room in that they all have complementary traits, and the centerpiece of their offense at quarterback, it's going to be Dylan Morris. He's the returning starter. They got the 5-star freshman in Heward, but I don't think he's ready yet. And they like how Dylan Morris manages the offense. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's not a burner on the ground, but he's good at avoiding sacks. I've heard people on the Washington side of things say that he might leave the pocket a little bit too early, but mostly he's a composed guy that manages the offense. The centerpiece of the offense is the tight end, Cade Otton. Like we just talked about with Wisconsin, if there's anyone that could give Jake Ferguson a run for his money as best tight end in the country, Cade Otton would be one of the first names you bring up. He is a really good tight end, a phenomenal blocker at the position. He's basically a 6th offensive lineman when he's in line, and he's a really, really strong hands. He's explosive enough at the position, but just surefire hands. He doesn't drop anything. He's going to go over the middle, big red zone target, and really an elite blocker. So he's kind of what they like to run their offense through if they're in the play action game or just the passing offense. Like I mentioned, the receivers are mostly average. They lost their top target, who transferred to BYU, Puka Nacua. The guys behind him are kind of low 4-star, high 3-star types, decent guys. They're nothing special. It's really similar to Wisconsin on offense. The thing that'll be interesting to see this year, and we won't even get much data by week 2, is what that Joe Donovan offense is going to look like. He was,
not a fan.
Yeah, and I'm not either. But Michigan fans might remember he was James Franklin's first offensive coordinator at Penn State, and he was pushed out because the offense just wasn't getting it done. So he's back after a stint with the Jaguars in the NFL, and we didn't get to see a ton of the offense, and it was all under weird circumstances last year in 4 games with no fans. So we'll see. I don't think it's going to be too much of a departure from what they were doing before with Bush Hamden, but They want to be, they want to run the ball. They want to be basically Wisconsin. They want to run the ball. They want to hit the tight end in the play action game. They don't want to make it too hard on their quarterback, and they want to see if you can slow down the run. And defensively, it's a lot like Wisconsin too. It's going to be a top 20 defensive unit. They're going to run a 3-4. The biggest news, the biggest notable piece of information on their defense is they lost probably their best player on defense in the spring to another Achilles injury. Zion, and I'm just not going to attempt his last name, but he goes by ZFD, a phenomenal pass rusher. Are really one of the better defensive players in the Pac-12. So it's unfortunate for their chances and for that kid's career, but Michigan is certainly happy that they're not going to have to see him in week 2. But defensive backs, they have more turnover than usual. They return a really good starting corner, but they lost
Elijah Molden.
They lost Elijah Molden to the NFL. They returned Trent McDuffie. They added the nickel back from Oklahoma, Bradley Hiles. Yeah. He left Oklahoma because although he was a starter there and made some plays, he was also had a lot of penalties, a lot of missed tackles. So he's a fiery guy and a really good athlete, but he's no longer at Oklahoma for various reasons. And then safeties, they return Asa Turner, who is a guy Michigan really liked, really wanted, West Coast guy. And they return, I want to say the other safety's name is
Dominique Hampton.
I was thinking of Cox or Clark, but I could be wrong on who is starting. But
could be Alex Cook.
Cook, thank you. Yeah, and so, but they've got kind of 4 guys that are pushing for a starting spot because play there has mostly been average. So I think all those battles were kind of ongoing throughout the spring. Even Turner, who is the returning starter, but they're looking for hopefully to upgrade there in the fall. But so that could be the weak part of the defense. They're good in the middle too. The linebackers are great. So it's going to be like Wisconsin. The defense is going to be top 20, top 15, really technically sound. Offense is going to come down to stopping the run game and trying to contain that tight end. When they struggled on offense last year, it was when teams got Cade Otton off his game, bumped him off his routes, and kind of had someone that could counter him in the run game.
Made it through that whole excerpt without even mentioning Job Jackson. It's amazing.
I'm trying to block that from memory. I might just keel over in the stands if Giles takes one back against us.
Well, opening kickoff, he just takes it back 100 yards.
Oh my God! Don't even. Yeah. It'll be interesting because he adds a kind of explosiveness that I don't really think of their wide receiver group as having. But he didn't get into Seattle in time for the spring, so he'll have to learn the offense in the fall. And then I think he's kind of a type of player they'll have to maybe create or find ways that are not necessarily in the offense right now to get him the ball. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact he has. Obviously, we know he's a superb athlete, and I think he's a good receiver. I think he's more than a return guy, but we'll see how he fits in with just fall camp to prepare for that game.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think Connor broke it down really well. Washington, I'll admit the Pac-12 in general, outside of USC and Oregon, is kind of a blind spot for me recruiting wise. I notice every defensive back that Jimmy Lake offers because he's got this kind of weird philosophy that he only offers like 10 defensive backs, and they're all between 5 and 10, they're all his 1A targets, and he lands a lot of them, and a lot of them go to the NFL.
And they're good, like really good. So it makes me excited about Pollard.
Yeah. And so I didn't know a whole bunch about, about their, players and their roster across the board. But I think he described it pretty well as like winnable Wisconsin. They're so similar stylistically, but the biggest difference is that it's at home. It's at home. They're going to have the all blues. Mark it down. Write it in Penn. Night game. I hope that Michigan plays well enough defensively in that's going to be the biggest game of Mozzie Smith's career. No matter how good he ends up being, that's going to be the biggest game of his Michigan career. If he can hold up, and it's not all on him, but that would be a huge boost to the season. I think, as Connor said, so much of the momentum for the season, rides on that game. I think Michigan will play well, and yeah, I'd say it's probably a toss up. But I think Michigan has a little bit more talent with new schemes and stuff that could cause some concern. But I'm with you guys on Donovan too. That guy never impressed me at Penn State, and I think that gives Michigan, although they have a new defense, new defensive coordinator. I think containing a conservative play caller is a lot easier than containing Ohio State or a Joe Moorhead offense or, anything else, any similar situation. So,
yeah, I agree. I think that's the perfect game early in the season to prepare for a team like Wisconsin, especially if you're running a new scheme. Like you said, it's like Wisconsin fights that offense and the way they run things. With Wisconsin being in week 5, I think this will be the perfect opportunity for them to face a team with personnel that's not as good or as well developed on offense, but they run a lot of the similar plays and run a similar scheme and that conservative play style. I think this is a really good early test for Michigan.
Yeah, if Michigan loses at home against Washington, I might not even watch the Wisconsin game.
Yeah, if they lose against Washington, it's going to be it'll be some dark times for Michigan fans. Might cancel my subscription to the Michigan Insider to avoid seeing all the messages from certain board members.
Yeah, it'll set the tone early either way. A loss kind of immediately drops the ceiling on the season to like 9-3 if we really improve along the way. A win
4, 7,
yeah.
Honestly,
because you're looking at if 9-3 is kind of what a lot of people would consider a successful kind of rebound season. Washington's got to be one of those 9 because you got to go to, like we said, Wisconsin's going to be a loss. We all have it as a loss. Ohio State's going to be a loss. So then if you don't win,
could be a loss.
Yeah, if you don't win Washington, then you have to win at Penn State if you're counting the other 2 as a loss. So yeah, it'll set the tone, and I'm banking on Michigan being up to the challenge and recognizing how big it is. I think too that's where the new staff, kind of a younger staff, more relatable to the players, good mix of NFL guys and guys who are like really ascending in their college coaching careers, is gonna help in this kind of big game environment. Because I think one thing we've seen from Michigan is just kind of coming out flat a little in these kind of really hyped up games. And I think, we've heard that maybe Jim is not a huge like fiery pregame speech guy. So I think, guys like Mike Hart, Ron Bellamy, Coach McDonald, that kind of infusion of youth on the staff is really gonna.
I think Mike Hart's gonna be the guy.
Yeah,
he knows what it takes.
And yeah, he's
especially the Michigan State game. Yeah, that's the guy to give pregame speech. Him and Ron Bellamy.
And you guys,
I think he's such a great addition to this team for so many reasons beyond just coaching the running backs room.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys think of a bigger out of conference game that wasn't Notre Dame? I mean, when was the Florida or first game of the year in 2017? But can you think of a bigger one that like impact wise on the season in not including Notre Dame?
No.
You might go back to like the last time we played Washington, like late Carr years. Yeah.
I can't think of one.
I mean, they played they played Alabama in the first week, but that was, they were big underdogs in that game. Outside of Notre Dame, we typically don't. Michigan typically doesn't play huge out of conference games. And this from not only, Washington's talent standpoint, but from the ramifications on the season, it's a big one.
Yeah. Utah in 2015, but that was Jim's first game, so that game wasn't hyped up like that. We didn't really know what Utah had necessarily. They turned out to be very good, but
we didn't know what Michigan had either. That game was actually a lot closer than I thought it would end up being. I found myself watching it over the off season. I watched on YouTube. There's this one guy that posts like full game highlights. I think his name's like Wolverine Devotee or something. I watched a lot of those highlights, and I really don't remember too much from that game whenever I was watching it live. But I would say that wasn't really too big because, like you said, it was Harbaugh's first game as a Michigan coach. So, yeah, this is probably the biggest in years.
We need. I'm only, I'm half serious when I say this. It would be great to bring in Phil Brabs to do the pregame speech. He was the kicker that kicked the game-winning field goal the last time we beat Washington at home, and he actually ended up getting and beating cancer shortly after his playing career. So, yeah, I'm sure they'll find all the best ways to get up for that game. I think the environment's going to be great, and I think and I hope they also realize how huge that game is this year.
Agreed. So now we get to the final game on our list, and this is the game that I wanted to highlight. It is the game against Indiana. They'll be playing at home. Indiana returns quite a few starters on offense. We've got Ty Freifogel, DJ Matthews at wide receiver, Caleb Jones at left tackle. They're going to be getting Zach Carpenter transferring from Michigan to Indiana. He'll probably slot in somewhere on the interior. I would guess center, but I'm not too familiar with their interior offensive line depth chart. Peyton Hendershot seems like he's been there for 10 years now at tight end. Michael Penix Jr., very talented quarterback. He got injured, was it late last year? He had a torn ACL in his other knee, I think it was. So he'll be coming back, redshirt junior. Tons of talent, really good arm talent. It'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that torn ACL. They got Stephen Carr, who's a former 5-star running back. He's a graduate transfer from USC. Samson James is another talented 4-star running back that got out of high school. He's been pretty good for Indiana so far. On the defensive side of the ball, I really like Marcelino Ball. He plays in their Husky position, kind of like that drop-down safety. Then they got Michael McFadden returning, Cam Jones returning. Then they got Tywone Mullen, who's a very talented corner. This is just an overall pretty good team. I'm not too confident in their depth on either side of the ball. I think last year was kind of just, I guess you could say, an anomaly for Indiana. I would say the last 2 years, they've outperformed what their talent level is. I don't think that they'll match that this year. I do know that Michigan, I feel like last year, it was a little bit tougher for them with so many guys opting out. They were missing so many people, and Joe Milton was just so bad in his quarterback play. I think this year with a guy like Cade McNamara and the talent that's returning on offense, they'll do much better against Indiana this time around. I know Indiana's got a pretty tough schedule. I think they open up against Iowa. Then they've got to play Michigan State before they get to Michigan. They've got to play Cincinnati before they get to Michigan. I know they got to go to Penn State. I don't think they've got any other game. Ohio State, I think, is another game that they've got after that or before that. So it'll be interesting to see how they do against Michigan. It'll be later on in the year, so I think Michigan's defense will be a lot more experienced and will improve a lot to the point where they can play pretty well against Michael Penix and the rest of that offense for Indiana. And, the Michigan's offense will have a ton of experience by then. I'm not too fond of Indiana's defensive line depth. They're returning some starters along the defensive line, but after that, they're kind of iffy here and there. So we'll see if Tom Allen can coached them up, and they lost a really good coordinator in Kane Womack. Matt, let me get your opinion on that Indiana game.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but I think they're getting a little overhyped off of last year. Just overall as a program, it was a great season. You know, I'm looking back at their schedule now, and you know they beat Wisconsin at Wisconsin. You know, end up going down to the wire with Ohio State. That wasn't as close as the final score indicated, but beat Michigan, and then obviously the Penn State game to start the year. You know, I don't want to call last year a fluke. I just don't think they're all of a sudden the second best, you know, team in the Big Ten East. Like some people are kind of slotting them in. I think they're a good program. I think Tom Allen's a good coach. They've lost a lot of good assistants in the last few years. You mentioned the defensive coordinator. I believe their offensive coordinator before Nick Sheridan is the guy that went out to Fresno State.
Yep. Kalen DeBoer.
You're right. Right. So he hired some pretty good coaches. And it looks like, you know, at least with Sheridan, he's on, you know, a decent track to replace him with good coaches. But, you know, I think their roster's okay. I think it's better than it's been. Indiana football is maybe at the best it's been, you know, for as long as I've been alive, in 30 years. So, yeah, I think they're getting a little bit overhyped, but I do think they're a good team. Do play them at home, do play them later in the year. Indiana is always seems like they always play Michigan tough. I have that one personally as a win, but I think they're I just think it's going to be a close one, like it always is with Indiana. And you know, will we get the break this year like they had, you know, for the past 20 years or so up until last year, or will Indiana kind of have that script flipped a little bit?
Yeah, I kind of expected Indiana to kind of peak, if you will, 2 years ago. I thought, you know, what did they end up in 2019? Like 7-5. I mean, they had like a pretty good year by Indiana standards, and everyone kind of recognized, okay, Kalen DeBoer, really good OC. Obviously, got him the Fresno State job. They're doing, you know, good creative things on defense. So we kind of, you know, and Penix is a good quarterback. They got wide receiver talent. So, you know, that year felt like, okay, you know, everyone's kind of recognizing that Indiana is it's a solid football team now. And then I think they really benefited last year by basically returning everyone, returning a really good starting quarterback. And a lot of the teams that didn't return a lot of the production and had to miss spring ball really suffered, whereas a team like Indiana had a lot of continuity, and they believe in themselves because, you know, Tom Allen, he's a fiery dude, and he's an Indiana guy. He's kind of the perfect coach for Indiana football. So I think 2020 was kind of an environment that allowed them to extend the kind of wave they're riding. It was, in my mind, almost like they were having their Spike Albrecht national championship game moment where they just couldn't miss. And now I don't think they'll crash, but I do think they'll start to come back to.
Yeah, no, I don't. They're still a really good team. I mean, they've got talent on the roster. There's no doubt about that. And some of the guys that I named on defense and on offense, like, you know, they're no joke. But I just don't think they're as good as their record indicated the past couple of years. Last year, I just think it was such an odd year in football. I mean, they got up to like the top 10, didn't they? They almost beat Ohio State to end up like going to the Big Ten championship. I mean, that's just how much of a crazy season it was that Indiana almost went instead of Ohio State.
Yeah, I think Matt touched on it. You know, they lost Kalen DeBoer. Now they've lost Womack. I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know what like game planning, play design, play calling role Mike played, but you lost a great young coach. He had an assistant head coach title. You lose a great young young coach in Mike Hart, kind of all these pieces that built this run, this crescendo for Indiana are starting to go away. So I think as they get farther from what they were, kind of at the beginning of last year or 2 years ago, even get farther from DeBoer's leadership, we'll see more of how skilled Sheridan is on his own. Well, we'll see how the new DC replaces Womack. As you lose those pieces, I think it gets harder to sustain. So Indiana can maintain like a 7-8 win type program, but they're not going to continue to be a 1 or 2 loss team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think 8-4 is probably realistic. It's got a pretty tough schedule: Michigan, Cincinnati, Ohio State, at Penn State. I think they open up against Iowa at Iowa begin the year. So
yeah, you mentioned this, Ronnie, but getting Indiana late in the year is so much better than having to face them early. Like if they were in the Rutgers slot before we go to Wisconsin,
that would concern me.
Yeah, that would be a very very concerning game. But in November,
Absolutely.
Penix has had so many injuries that you almost can't even count on him being healthy for that November game. Seems like every year he's got something, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, he's torn both of his ACLs now.
Yeah.
Other banged up injuries with his hand. And yeah, he's got a little bit of a history there. Matt, any final thoughts on this game before we wrap up the episode?
No, I think Indiana is. I think that point in the schedule is, well taken on my end. They are in between. I will mention that for Michigan, they are in between Michigan State and Penn State.
Yeah.
So while it is later in the year, that's a big 3-game stretch for Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
No bye week in between you either, is there?
No
buys between Nebraska and Northwestern.
Penn State might be a loss then. I'm just saying, if they lose to Michigan State or Indiana, it'll get real dark real quick. I think that could end up being that stretch where, the Washington game was a big win. We head into Michigan State with 1 loss, and that 3-game stretch right there could end up being like a season derailor.
Yep, that it could be one way or the other. That could build quite a bit of momentum, or that could be could tell us a lot about the direction the Harbaugh tenure is going.
Yeah, I do think the people on the outside looking in, kind of, that see, the buyout was lowered, the salary was lowered. I think the leash is longer than those people might think, but a loss to Michigan State again this year would cut that leash very, very, very short.
Completely agree.
Yeah,
completely agree.
Might pull the leash off.
Yeah, if they're 7-5 with, you lose to Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, and maybe you take out one of the Michigan State, Indiana, Penn State, and add in Washington. I mean, it could be a really fun season, or it could be could go a lot of different ways here.
So what do you guys have?
Agree.
What do you guys have record wise?
I was gonna ask that just as we were getting ready to wrap up this podcast. Before we go quickly, Contown, we'll start with you. Season prediction, record wise, and who they would lose to.
So I've got us at 9-3. I just think that's kind of been the average over the years here, and I think it's more likely that we get back to average than we keep performing subpar, below Harbaugh standards. So I'm gonna say 9-3. Ohio State and Wisconsin are surefire losses, and right now I'm gonna say we beat Penn State, but I think we're gonna lose in Nebraska, and no one's gonna be happy about that. And I don't think Nebraska is great, but I think they're gonna be really geared up for that game. Or we'll be coming off a loss. It'll be tough.
Okay, Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I've also got 9-3, and I do think I will say that I think 8-4 would be more likely than 10-2. I think
Yeah.
it's more likely that they lose to two of Washington, Penn State, Michigan State, Indiana, Nebraska. I think it's more likely that they lose to two of those than they sweep those. And a sweep would be required if I'm counting Ohio State and Wisconsin as surefire losses. So I've got 9-3. I've got Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State. And I could easily be talked into flipping that Penn State for Washington just because of the matchup styles clashing that has given us trouble in the past few years and being earlier in the year.
Gotcha. Well, damn, if you guys go 9-3 each, I was going to go 9-3, but I'm not going to go 9-3. I'm going to be different. I'm going to go 10-2. I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to say we lose to Wisconsin. I think we lose to Ohio State once again, like always. I'm going to be confident. I don't think Indiana will be as good as last year. Michigan State, I think that's a very winnable game. We seem to play better for some reason at Michigan State, and then Penn State not being a night game, and the defense, or just the team itself, I think that by that time we'll be very experienced. Maybe I'm just on a high because I've been watching a lot of Baltimore Ravens highlights today and just a lot of film, and I'm like in love with that defense. So I don't know. We'll see. And I hope it's 10-2. That would make the recruiting class go absolutely bonkers. I feel like if we could see guys like Josh Connolly getting into the fold, Mark Naboo, other really big top targets in Michigan getting into the fold after a really good season. But for that, this is another episode of the Hail to Michigan podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you find this podcast. I am your host, Ronnie Harder. Joining me today was Contown and Matt. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.